Living in paradise. Paradise is a state of consciousness. It may be different for each soul. Some will consider it paradise just to be out of the city, while others may not call it paradise until their community has been stable for 10 or 20 years. A utopian worldview is not what we are advocating here, but we do see a time when all human beings on Earth will evolve beyond the need to control and manipulate the world and other souls. This is a time when true cooperation reigns, when souls recognize the God in each other and walk their talk as masters on the earth. Your brothers and sisters from the stars will walk among you once again. They will welcome you back into the great cosmic family. The earth will be restored to the Garden of Eden it has always been on another dimension. That level of reality will descend gently into all consciousness remaining on the earth, and all will be one. Until that time, there is a lot of building to be done. Below is a list of the best places to have alternative communities of light. This is not an exhaustive list. A few communities will thrive in other areas, especially if they already have a high level of consciousness and can overcome extremes of weather or close proximity to third-density cities. In some cases, oppressive governments will still make it difficult to start communities, but over time, those governments will transition into a more enlightened state. The best places for alternative communities. Western Canada, Northwestern USA, Southwestern USA, Southeastern USA, Southwest Mexico, Costa Rica, Western Brazil, Northern Argentina, Central Uruguay, Northern United Kingdom, Southern France, Northern Spain, Extreme Southern Netherlands, parts of Belgium, Southwestern Germany, parts of Switzerland, Extreme Northern Italy, Northern Croatia, Eastern Serbia, Northwestern Romania, Central Bulgaria, South-Central Turkey, parts of Eastern Ethiopia, parts of Madagascar, Extreme Northern South Africa, parts of Congo, Western and Central Russia in Ural Mountains, Northwestern China, Southern Siberia, parts of Malaysia, Northwestern Islands of Hawaii, Eastern Australia, Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales, parts of the South Island of New Zealand, Southwestern part of the Northern Island of New Zealand. Chapter 10. Technological advances. One of the most important aspects of the New Earth involves the responsible use of advanced technologies. The scenarios unfolding on Earth do not involve a return to the primitive way of life that has typically preceded the dissolution or destruction of previous organized societies. Just as a refresher, there have been 4 major civilizations on Earth: Pangaea, Lemuria, Atlantis, and the one currently dissolving. After each of the previous dissolutions, life on Earth, decimated by natural and man-made disasters, resumed in a very limited state, often with basic survival skills and simple resources, such as wood fires and crude tools. For the most part, the technological knowledge from each previous civilization was temporarily lost when things crumbled. Just a few remnants survived. Of course, the collective consciousness, in the Akashic records, contains information about all technological advances ever made since the beginning of Earth. As new civilizations have come and gone, the more awakened scientists have tapped into the Akashic field to rediscover the technologies of sacred geometry, crystal generators, zero-point energy, cold fusion, radionics, and more. We have gone into the question of why civilizations fall repeatedly just when things seem to be breaking through to a new level. In every case, a few souls have managed to retain their knowledge from those times and apply it in future incarnations. Also, in most cases, a small number of souls have chosen to leave the Earth with their consciousness intact and go on to other worlds, rather than be a part of starting over on Earth. The preferred way of the wise ones from civilizations past has been to remain in the higher realms and communicate with new fledgling societies through telepathic contact, channeling, and an occasional brief landing on the Earth. The latter method, for reasons discussed previously, has been discouraged, and it is mostly the lesser evolved ETs that interact directly with humans via spacecraft and holographic projection. There is a great deal of truth to the statement, made by many of your seers, that technologies were withdrawn by the wise ones to prevent misuse by the evolving humans, many of whom had forgotten their spiritual understandings when going through the destruction of previous civilizations. Due to the non-interference doctrine, many wise ones simply left the Earth plane altogether, leaving struggling humanity to make their own choices, which were often not for the benefit of maximum soul growth. This was seldom due to lack of compassion, but rather, an unwillingness on the part of the spiritually ascended to fall once again into a state of forgetfulness. Various safeguards have been put in place to prevent the misuse of powerful technologies. The frequency fence was a collaboration of the light and dark factions of the Orion and Sirius A star races. The Dark Ones wanted to trap humans on Earth and prevent them from developing psychic and intuitive powers. The Light Ones supported the quarantine because they did not want the negative humans on Earth to migrate to neighboring parts of the galaxy, spreading their warring ways. There have been energetic patterns put in place on Earth to prevent the utilization of advanced technologies. Nevertheless, due to interference by the Zetas, Dark Orions, Light Pleiadians and other groups, high technology was reintroduced in the 20th century in the form of integrated circuits, computers and telecommunications devices. So as you can see, there are several factors that have, in the past, prevented the reintroduction of advanced technologies after a civilization has fallen. In the present transitory state on Earth, a sufficient number of enlightened souls will survive the changes with their knowledge of higher truths intact, and this will allow them to set up resonant fields conducive to the development of higher technologies. There will be some lag time or delay in the future development of new technologies due to the likely destruction of many of the telecommunication satellites and the ground infrastructure, due to warfare, terrestrial and solar storms, etc., but enough knowledge will remain to reconstruct and resurrect the technologies most useful, such as the Internet and telephone. In addition, souls in fourth density will be rapidly developing their telepathic abilities, which will assist them greatly in balancing their use of technology. A brief intro to zero-point technologies. From a quantum physics perspective, higher technologies, such as zero-point machines, can only exist within a resonance that is supportive of superconducting fields. A predominantly negative consciousness does not create a supportive resonant field. From a metaphysical perspective, a planet that contains a large negative consciousness that believes in lack and scarcity will not attract the prosperity and abundance associated with zero-point fields. To review, these technologies create a bridge between the etheric and physical realms, allowing the nearly infinite field of undifferentiated source energy to flow into and regenerate the physical realm. Some scientists call this energy flow, centropy, or charged entropy, because it is the opposite of the entropy observed in the second law of thermodynamics. To put this in lay terms, the spiritual energy of the source revitalizes things that have run down, or are worn out by the ravages of third density time. We will examine zero-point technology in greater depth later in this chapter. Using technology responsibly. We wish to come back to a point made earlier regarding the need to withhold certain technologies until souls are ready to use them wisely. This can be likened to the idea of refusing to allow a toddler to play with matches. Just as the Galactic Confederation is blocking the use of your nuclear weapons, Except for a few tests here and there, they are also broadcasting frequencies to prevent the implementation of higher technologies that could conceivably be used malevolently. If an inventor is telepathically in touch with higher beings and has a sufficiently evolved consciousness, these blocking frequencies are temporarily lifted to allow the inventor to move forward with the development of the new technology. We in the higher realms regret the need to intervene in this matter, but the state of affairs on Earth is far too delicate to simply allow unrestrained development of new energies without oversight. After 2020, the consciousness on Earth, and the vibration of Earth herself, will be sufficient to lift the veils over the harmonious resonant fields. Once these barriers are lifted, the resonant field of Earth will allow for 0-point and other devices to function anywhere on the planet. Consciousness and the quantum realm are intrinsically linked and must be respected. As you embrace the idea that you live in an infinitely prosperous and abundant universe and you open to be the channels for those frequencies, you will be entrusted with the use of higher technologies. We will give some details regarding the higher forms of technology later in this chapter and explain how to make them work consistently once the frequency barrier is lifted. Until that time, you will need to use non-polluting technologies that are already in place on your world. Below, we will detail our perception of how these existing technologies will be developed over the next few decades. Existing alternative technologies. There are several technologies available right now to use while you are preparing to mass distribute the higher forms described earlier. Solar energy. Solar cells have been available for over 60 years, but the technology has been slow to progress. This is due partially to the initial cost of installation, along with the fact that solar is not completely reliable in the northern climates where it is cloudy much of the year. It is also due to intentional downplaying of its benefits by the nuclear and fossil fuel industries. A lot of third-density souls see the usefulness of solar power but are convinced that cheap fossil fuel and nuclear-generated electricity will always be around, so why go through the bother of purchasing the panels, having them installed, and possibly having them interfere with the look and feel of the home? Yes, some souls feel the panels are ugly and detract from beauty of a home's architecture. We anticipate some advances in the efficiency of solar cell arrays in the next few years. Since fossil fuel prices periodically escalate sharply, there is renewed interest by some companies who now feel customers will be more willing to pay for solar systems today than they were back when fossil fuels were a lot cheaper. Therefore, we predict there will be a 2- or 3-fold increase in the number of residences with solar panels installed over the next 10 years. We realize this is still a small percentage of total households, but a lot of homeowners are feeling financially stressed and some are barely making their house payments and do not feel they can put out the money for the initial purchase. Others will wait until there are frequent brownouts, and even blackouts within the existing power grid, or until the cost of coal, oil, or nuclear-based power doubles or triples. Hydroelectric power. There is a movement toward small hydro plants along minor streams and rivers that involve simply catching existing water flow to generate electricity for a few houses downstream. This is certainly feasible and has been used off and on for quite some time already. Unfortunately, the vast majority of hydroelectric energy comes from large dams that flood huge land areas, often to the detriment of land and water species, as well as homeowners living upstream of the dam site. Like traditional fossil fuel and nuclear-based plants, high-tension electrical lines are installed, often across steep mountains for hundreds of miles, with thousands of trees uprooted to allow for the passage of the lines. In many areas we on this channel have observed that significant doses of pesticides are used to clear plant material from around the high-tension lines. So while the initial power plant does not pollute the way coal, oil, gas and nuclear facilities do, there is still a cost to the environment. There are low-impact hydro plants that can be installed anywhere there is ample water flow, but generally this should be considered a supplemental energy source and not the primary one, especially in heavily populated areas. We are aware that places like Niagara Falls are able to generate a fair amount of electricity without greatly spoiling the natural landscape or significantly altering the water flow, but locations like that are an exception to the rule. Even with that water, the companies involved are heavily motivated by maximizing profits and seem to care little for the environment beyond the initial low pollution of the plants themselves. If you have an intentional community with ample water flow, it is in your best interest to find someone who understands hydroelectricity and how to harness it without destroying the environment around the water source. With proper management of water and intelligent distribution of populations on Earth, large dams would be unnecessary. For example, over half of the fresh water in California goes to grow feed for cattle so human beings can continue eating beef. It is not judgmental to point out that the eating of mammals takes a heavy toll on your environment. Not only would huge amounts of water be conserved by adopting a mostly vegetarian diet, but the land currently used to grow feed for cattle could be converted into fruits and vegetables for human consumption. This is not to mention the billions saved in healthcare costs because a diet low in red meat produces far fewer negative health effects in the average human than a typical meat and potatoes diet. We apologize for getting off the subject of hydropower. Wind power. Almost two-thirds of the Earth's surface, where temperatures are tolerable for human habitation, involve areas where the wind blows frequently. There are a few places that currently utilize wind power extensively, such as the hills of coastal California and the western plains of Texas. Again, the large commercial wind farms are primarily concerned with maximizing profit, and while wind is generally non-polluting, distribution of electrical lines from wind generating stations is still disruptive to the environment. Personal wind generators installed within intentional communities are recommended as a supplemental energy source to solar and hydro. Unless you are in a drought and the weather is cloudy and still, at least one alternative energy source is likely to be generating, and even if none of them are active, you can install battery packs to meet out the power incrementally. Battery technology has only improved marginally in the past 60 years on Earth, but we also see some gains occurring in that department over the next few years. All of these alternative technologies require an initial investment of money and time. Some human beings will wait until it is too late before they realize they should have had something in place. If you are used to going to the grocery store at any time of the day or night, or simply turning on the light switch to get light, and it never crosses your mind that one day these conveniences might not be there, then you will be in for a rude awakening. Now is the time to start thinking about ways to become self-sufficient as far as energy is concerned. Now is the time to start thinking about ways to become self-sufficient as far as energy is concerned. At the same time, ask yourself, how much energy consumption do I really need in order to be happy? Is life really better because you have that 52-inch television? Do you need 4 computers all on at the same time in different parts of the house? Is it necessary to run the air conditioner the minute the temperature creeps above 21 degrees Celsius? By reducing your consumption and installing some alternative energy generators, you can begin to wean yourselves off the big power companies. Hydrogen fuel cells. This is a technology that has advanced a fair bit over the past 20 years. It is now cheaper and safer to use hydrogen directly as a fuel than it was back then, although the peripheral systems, intake, exhaust, etc., do require some significant adjustments if you are converting from a hydrocarbon-based engine system. Biodiesel. Biodiesel is a fuel derived from plant sources. Unlike corn ethanol, it does not require excessive energy input. It is possible to grow certain crops and process them into biodiesel without taking up large tracts of land that could be used to feed human beings. This is a stepping stone technology until more efficient hydrogen fuel cells are widely available at an affordable price. Hybrid vehicles and machines. One of the current trends is to modify engines to blend fossil fuels with battery-powered electrical systems. Basically, when acceleration is needed, the car burns fossil fuels, but at the same time the battery is being charged and takes over when acceleration stops. As long as there is a balanced amount of accelerating versus coasting, braking or stopping, this technology works fine and extends fuel mileage considerably. Best places for solar, wind and hydro energy. The best geographical locations for existing alternative energy systems are obviously places with a lot of sunshine, wind and water. Before we give worldly locations, let us discuss micro-locations, i.e., where on a piece of land to place alternative energy generators. Best locations on existing land. Ideally, a tract of land being used as a farm and/or intentional community should be located on a gentle hillside facing the sun, with proper drainage, and only the bottom section on a floodplain so that in drier years you have access to rich soil. Houses should be placed midway between the top and bottom of the hill, ideally on shelves with a thin layer of soil and solid rock underneath the shallow layer. If there is not already a natural thick forest near the top of the hill, trees should be planted several layers deep across the top and on steep slopes to prevent erosion and to protect from high winds. Wind generators should be placed near the back of open areas facing the prevailing wind direction. Hydro generators should be placed as far upstream as possible, ideally near the top of the property. Solar panels should rotate to follow the sun and be adjusted seasonally. Gardens should be spaced throughout the property wherever soil is good, both on the hillside and in the floodplain. If you are drip irrigating or running pipes from a stream, you will obviously want to make use of gravity flow whenever possible, which means some part of your garden should be below the elevation of a portion of your stream. In the northern hemisphere, your houses should be built with east, south and west facing windows. If octagonal, a southeast, south and southwest orientation is best. In the southern hemisphere, your windows would face northwest, north and northeast. If you are near the equator, you will probably place your solar panels directly above your house and place windows in any direction. Keep in mind that if you live in a hot climate, you will want a way of shading your house. That usually means locating it amongst broadleaf trees. In the summer, the leaves will shield you from the sun, and in the winter, the absence of leaves will allow the sun to warm your house. Passive solar. The above may be common sense and a bit elementary to those of you who are carpenters, builders, architects or alternative energy engineers or designers, but some of you who are not skilled in these areas may start your new communities before you engage the services of a professional, and so the more information you have in advance, the better. Best planetary locations for alternative energy. As for planetary locations favorable for wind, hydro and solar energies, we recommend some of the same places already mentioned in previous sections, namely, southwestern Canada, northwestern USA, southwestern USA, southeastern USA, Costa Rica, southwestern Mexico, portions of Argentina and Uruguay, southern France, northern Spain, northern Italy, northern Greece, south-central Turkey, extreme southern Russia, north-central Africa, South Africa, western China, northwest Hawaii, eastern Australia, and anywhere else where the climate is temperate, not too hot or cold, and ranges from semi-arid to semi-moist. Places to avoid would include low-lying flat plains, even though wind is often abundant, arid deserts, rainforests, and most coastlines. Also, make sure your property is not likely to be taken by eminent domain. In other words, you should not be in the path of existing power lines, or in a location directly between a large reservoir and a heavily populated area where new power lines are likely to be built. Think ahead. Expect that the cities closest to you will be hungry, hot or cold, meaning they will want energy and food, a lot of it, in the years to come, and they may not use polite and diligent means to acquire it. Although your community might evolve quickly enough into higher densities to become psychologically invisible, do not assume that will be the case. Start your community in an area that is off the beaten path. Ask yourselves, when resources get scarce, where will nearby cities look for new resources? Most of all, ask your own God presence to guide you to the right piece of land. See yourselves attracting souls who are experienced with installing wind, hydro and solar generators. Set aside financial resources for purchasing these items. Expect that they will cost 50% more than you think they will, even if prices seem to be dropping on some items. If you hire contractors, do some research. Ask others who have lived in the area for a while who they recommend. Whenever possible, inspect the work done on other properties. Talk to neighbors and neighboring communities about their projects. Do not wait until you are desperate to get up and running and then take shortcuts that you might later regret. Coming from fear or desperation during the earth changes will shut off your intuitive and psychic abilities and cause you to make poor decisions. We in the higher realms are here to help you stay in your center of being while making important choices about the future. Always go within and feel the energy of our advice as well. Learn to recognize what highest option energy feels like. Do you feel light and clear when selecting a garden spot? Do you feel a deep sense of peace regarding your solar panel installer? Are you feeling confident and energetic about putting together your own inverters and batteries? Do you still have money in the bank after buying all the inevitable extras that come with any project? We hope you have enjoyed our foray into the practical details of building an alternative energy system. Know that we have included this practical advice to help round out the Earth changes information and that this is not intended to be an exhaustive dissertation on how to build your community. There are numerous books on each of the subjects we have touched on here. Go to the internet, library, or local community business directory to find out more on these subjects. New technologies. Cold fusion. Your mainstream scientists rejected cold fusion when it was first produced successfully, going to great lengths to discredit the inventors. Some countries, most notably Japan, were not so fast to write off cold fusion. Over the years, much research has come forth indicating that cold fusion is indeed real. Cold fusion works on a principle similar to radionics, discussed next, and zero-point energy, discussed a little later. Basically, atoms in a specialized medium, such as noble gases interspersed with rare metals and other elements inserted as catalysts, will form a resonant field sufficient to change the energetic state of the medium. Unlike radionics and zero-point energy, cold fusion does not rely on entropy, or energy from the vacuum, from the etheric planes in actuality. The cold fusion process involves a release of heat as partially unstable isotopes are fused into more stable isotopes. The process works in a similar manner to conventional fusion reactions, such as hydrogen to helium, normally occurring at very high temperatures. Because of the catalytic elements involved in cold fusion, the isotopes behave in the desired manner at temperatures barely above the average Earth environment, typically between 30 and 50 degrees Celsius. We recommend browsing the internet and specifically, looking at Japan's cold fusion research, for more information. Radionics. Radionic devices are constructed of somewhat ordinary materials, such as copper wire, resistors and insulators, but in such a way that they form mini-vortices capable of concentrating electromagnetic energy and directing it where it is needed. In essence, radionic devices work in a way similar to microwave technology, but utilizing a different part of the light spectrum. Radionics differs from zero-point energy in that you are tapping into concentrated areas of electromagnetism and manipulating the flow of electrons, but not necessarily opening a wormhole into the etheric planes. You could say that radionics technology is a stepping stone between conventional electromagnetism and zero-point fields. Pyramids, multiple wave oscillators, Tesla coils, van der Watt generators, and large capacitors all can be made to harness radionic M fields. Size and dimension of these devices is critical so that you are amplifying the natural oscillations of the M waves. As you know, magnetic waves are 90 degrees out of phase with electric waves. By taking this into account using polar coordinates and multiple variable wave vector equations, systems can be designed mathematically with precision. Gravity and electromagnetism. One of the biggest mysteries among your physical scientists involves finding the relationship between gravity and electromagnetism. We will seek to give a partial answer to this holy grail of physics, omitting much of the math. Since everything in the universe is ultimately one, there is a relationship between every aspect of creation, even those aspects that seem vastly different and separated by great degrees of space and time. For example, an amoeba living on an Earth-like planet in a distant galaxy 10 billion light-years from your galaxy has a relationship with a human being on Earth. Gravity is a force of affinity between life forms and also between so-called inanimate objects. Every object, including all life forms, that has mass will have some degree of gravity. Every object, and life form, has some degree of consciousness. In fact, there is such a thing as atomic consciousness, or the basic unit of consciousness inherent in one atom. Without taking the time to define the constants associated with different elements, the most basic level of consciousness, level 1 on this channel's scale, can be quantized into a packet of energy having particle and wave-like properties, but on a much smaller scale than your quarks. We will denote these particle waves as God units, Gus. The affinity principle, or gravity, in which objects are attracted to one another based on their mass and distance, we will measure in the popularly coined term, gravitons. If we take two hypothetical objects and measure both the electromagnetic field emanating from those objects and the gravitational field that exists between them, we can find a mathematical relationship between the two forces. This means that if we know the M field attributes, but not the gravity, we can calculate the gravity, and if we know the gravity, but not the M field, we can calculate the M field. In other words, there are constants that can be determined that show how these two forces interact, effectively increasing or decreasing the M and gravitational fields. For example, if you increase the love and light consciousness between two objects, the M field increases and so does the gravitational attraction. This runs contrary to the Newtonian postulate that assumes gravity between objects remains constant as long as the mass and distance have not changed. The reason your scientists have not been able to measure this interrelatedness is because you are dealing with very small quantities and very large differences between the magnitudes of the forces. The actual relationship between gravity and electromagnetism can be given as follows. Gus emanating from the first object, times a GU constant, about 6 × 10⁻⁻15 joules, times Planck's constant, times the proportion of mass between the two objects, times the inverse of the distance between the objects, equals the measure of gravitons that exist between the objects. With proper substitution and differentiation of the constants and variables in this equation, gravitons can be expressed in joules, a common unit of measure for M fields. We have omitted the variable definitions and resulting differential equations required to calculate these values, in the interest of our non-science readers, and because we have not been authorized to give you every detail of the relationship between electromagnetism and gravity, but there is enough here to get the serious researchers among you busy. You will note that the equation above gives a very tiny value for gravity unless the objects are very large and close together. Your scientists already know that electromagnetism is millions of times stronger than gravity, but now you also know that the true magnitude of the difference is dependent on the level of consciousness between the objects. A soul that focuses intently on a desired outcome, for instance, generates a larger magnitude of God units than someone whose mind is wandering from subject to subject. Your EEG machines, and other devices, are already able to measure brain wave activity. There is a constant, derived using advanced mathematics employing multiple variable differential equations and nonlinear vectors, that describes how to calculate God units based on the millijoules of electricity measured by brainwave devices. Measuring consciousness. Once your scientists calculate the value of the God constant, they will be able to measure consciousness itself. No longer will the metaphysical and spiritual worlds of the soul be kept separate from the external world of gravity and electromagnetism. Note: you also have the strong and weak nuclear forces, which are really one force in two different configurations. Both of these configurations also have a relationship with consciousness and, of course, with gravity. You will find that all forces observed in nature are directly related, through various constants and formulas. The missing ingredient in your calculations is consciousness. Some of your scientists will attempt to simplify the mathematics involved here by giving consciousness a designation as the fifth primary force in the cosmos. Your mainstream scientists will balk at this idea because of the difficulty in measuring God units. You do not currently have instrumentation capable of measuring Planck's constant times the consciousness constant. The power of 10 here is approximately -50, or about 100 billion times smaller than one quantum packet of energy. Others will attempt to use superstring theory and multidimensional constants to measure God units. This will eventually look good on paper if you know the Greek alphabet, but advances in measurement technology are still a ways off for proper verification, and you will again find a lot of creative mathematics with this approach. A general difficulty in measuring consciousness is that, in its pristine state, it is omnidirectional, which means you cannot simply move consciousness along a wire in one direction and expect to capture all of it at a point in space. At present, most humans, even when they focus intently on a particular object, still scatter a lot of gus in different directions away from the intended target. This is one of the reasons only a few humans have been able to practice psychokinetics successfully, the ability to move objects that are unattached to the physical body using the psychic faculties. One example of instrumentation that can measure the macro effects of consciousness is your biofeedback equipment. Note that these devices do not measure consciousness directly, but calculate the electricity generated by the mind through temperature and moisture differentials in the skin or bodily organs. Through a series of amplifiers, one can get a person to move the needle on a meter with just the power of thought. There is a debate among parapsychologists as to whether the needle moves because the subject desires it to, or whether it is simply reacting to the subject's ability to change body temperature and moisture at the location of the electrodes. It is obvious that the mind of a subject can control his own physical body, in some cases even changing heartbeat and vital functions, but to generate enough M-field magnitude to move a distant object requires the ability to tap into the M-energy field, the etheric plane, and move it unidirectionally, rather than omnidirectionally. Essentially, by learning to unidirect consciousness, the soul becomes a type of zero-point device, capable of giving and receiving virtually unlimited amounts of energy. We will discuss zero-point energy in the next section. There are visualizations that involve seeing energy cascading down from the higher dimensions, entering the crown chakra and then passing through the body and out the hands. This energy can then be directed to parts of the body, of the subject or others, that are in need of healing and restoration. Basically, psychic and spiritual healing techniques are utilizing the zero-point field by opening up a resonance into the etheric planes and then downloading energy from those levels into the physical plane. More on zero-point energy. In our previous book, Earth Changes and Beyond, we talked briefly about zero-point fields, how they work and when to expect mass production of generators. We would like to go into more detail at this time, without losing our readers who are not scientifically oriented. It is a challenge to present this material in lay terms, but we look forward to the challenge, with the help of the channel. The most important thing to realize about the universe is that it is based on varying degrees of resistance. In this case, we are using the word resistance in both its technical and metaphysical meanings, for they are intertwined. From a metaphysical perspective, the higher the degree of resistance, the more you are not accepting what is in every moment. Infinite resistance would be complete rejection of an aspect of reality or denial. Zero resistance would be a state of complete acceptance of what is. In electricity, infinite resistance means you have an open circuit where no current can flow, and hence, no useful electricity. If you have no resistance at all, you have infinite energy available, based on Ohm's law. If you use the analogy of God's limitless love and compassion flowing into a human being, you can see how these two ideas intertwine. If you are resistant to the divine, the energy cannot flow through your being and you will not receive healing. If you are in denial about some aspects of your reality, you have unrecognized resistance there. The resistance of denial is so great that almost no divine energy can enter those places and so they wither and die. Often this shows up in the body as disease or atrophy. The solution is to become aware of those places and send them love and compassion, along with visualizations of God's golden, radiant, loving light. In zero-point technology, we can apply this idea liberally as follows. It is possible to design and construct materials that either oppose or resist incoming etheric energies, or work in harmony with these energies. Sometimes you want to block certain energies and so you design a material that effectively blocks those frequencies. The simplest example involves the element lead used to block various types of radiation. More importantly, in zero-point technology, you create materials that produce resonance, or superconducting fields, which essentially means the atoms and molecules come together in a special pattern of resonance that allows the free flow of energy between them. You have what are called monatomic resonant fields, or orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, ORMUS. You may start with a rare metal in its native state, where the atoms are arranged symmetrically, perhaps in rows or utilizing some basic geometry, and then by rearranging them electrically, or with the help of consciousness, they are able to align themselves into a resonant field. The popular example is the conversion of yellow metallic gold into the white powder monatomic form of gold. When you create a resonant field within a material, there is virtually no resistance between the atoms or molecules comprising the substance. As you know from Ohm's law, the less the resistance, the more the current, available electricity. As the resistance in a substance drops to zero, the current approaches infinity. While technically it is impossible in the lower realms to achieve complete superconductivity, zero resistance, with proper understanding you can come close to realizing this. We know that the type of wire needed to transmit high levels of current is problematic at present, but we foresee advances in building material technology in the years to come. ORMUS are created chemically through proper introduction of catalysts. Zero-point technology involves inducing a superconducting resonant field through proper application of electromagnetic devices and existing DC current. What happens when a superconducting resonant field is generated electromagnetically? To oversimplify, energy tunnels through from the etheric realms into the physical. These tunnels exist in the spaces where the polarity of the electromagnetic field of the machine is completely balanced, i.e., the point equidistant from the poles of a magnet if the poles are exactly the same magnitude of polarity. To construct a zero-point device, you must be able to calculate how the electrons are going to move and how much resistance is in the basic building materials. In addition, you must generate electromagnetic fields at precise coordinates such that the intertwining fields match the resonant points or vectors of the system. The mathematics used to construct such a device employs the use of what is commonly called multiple variable nonlinear vector equations. The rigorous mathematics, along with the need for precise measurements of magnets, wires, insulators, coils, transmitters, resistors and capacitors, make it difficult for the average inventor to perfect a zero-point machine. Nevertheless, crude versions can be built cheaply with everyday materials because even an approximation of the right proportions of angles, vertices, lengths, widths, etc., will generate some tunneling effect. The relationship between consciousness and zero-point technology is not understood by most human scientists, yet this is an essential part of its development. The reason we gave the spiritual analogy of a soul completely open to the divine is because such a consciousness in effect creates a zero-point field around it, mimicking the electromagnetic equivalent. When this consciousness field interacts with an M field, it moves the M field into resonance. This is a rough way of saying that an observer, who is in harmony with a zero-point device, assists the zero-point device in functioning optimally. You may know if you have studied quantum mechanics, that you cannot achieve a quantum state that is not somewhat compromised by the presence of the observer. This is because the observer generates gusts that affect the experiment. It is also due to the non-locality principle of quantum physics, which will be discussed at a later time. This is also the reason you cannot attain absolute zero temperature in a laboratory. The presence of consciousness in the laboratory generates enough energy to keep the temperature of the system a few millionths of a degree Kelvin above zero. In fact, just thinking about the experiment is enough to generate interference within the closed quantum vacuum. As stated in our previous section, consciousness, which consists of what physics calls God particles, can pass through any and all known materials. As you grow and evolve as souls, you will learn to have a more direct influence over atoms and molecules in substances that appear to be separate from your energetic field. This is called psychokinetics, or telekinetics, depending on the type of influence involved. What you may not realize is that you are already psychokinetic in nature, although most of you have not learned how to direct your consciousness units in an organized way out into a seemingly separate quantum system. Holding the intention that a zero-point device will function the way you want it to has an enormous effect on the device. Your resonant field consciousness attunes itself to the resonant field of the device, augmenting the resonance of the field that is already carefully designed using vector mathematics. If it were possible to have no influence of consciousness, then theoretically the device would work, but we know that all laboratories exist in a sea of consciousness. The distance between an observer and the laboratory is not as crucial as the intensity of the thought forms about the experiment. If a group of 100 scientists is on the other side of the world and is thinking negatively about an experiment, they might have enough influence to stop the desired effects, even if you are right in front of the vacuum chamber sending it positive thoughts. The net effect of all consciousness, after taking into account the intensity of the thought fields emanating from souls, will usually determine the outcome of the experiments. This is why we have given the period of 2015 to 2020 as the years of the tipping point, when zero-point machines will finally be able to proliferate on the Earth. That is when we feel the consciousness of humanity, in collaboration with the base frequency of Earth herself, will be harmonious enough to balance out any negativity being sent to zero-point fields. Types of zero-point and over-unity devices. Most zero-point devices make use of circular or toroidal iron core magnets carefully placed around coils and a DC motor. The object of the machine is to generate areas of nonpolarized M energy, often called scalar M fields, by passing a current through the coil while the magnet is rotating. The initial rotation would be achieved by kick-starting the device with a simple 12 volts battery, or 24V or 48V. As the magnet turns around the coil, the M field generated along the coil interacts with and feeds back into the loop with the magnetic field of the magnet. Because electric and magnetic poles within an M system are 90 degrees out of phase, the velocity, angular momentum, of the system will cause fluctuations within the two fields. Sometimes they will cancel each other out, and at other times the fields will combine their energy. As the magnet rotates, you will have 090, 180, 90, 090, 180, 90 etc. as your angles of incidence. As the DC current moves along the coil, the system creates a polarized field which interacts with the rotating magnet. Essentially, you will have periodic interactions of plus plus, plus minus, minus minus, minus plus, plus plus, etc. At the midway point between the plus and minus charges of the polarized field, you cross the zero point where there is temporarily a perfectly balanced polarity, albeit lasting a few microseconds during each magnetic rotation. Through varying the velocity of the magnet and designing it with the right geometrical precision, you can enlarge the zero point windows, and direct the energy that tunnels through the windows onto a collector plate. The usual configuration is to reroute the energy from the collector plate back into the system, essentially replacing the DC battery with a perpetual motion machine. With proper design, the energy collected from the vacuum, really, the etheric realm, will far exceed the 12V, or 24V or 48V, nominal value, thus resulting in over-unity, or the ability to produce more energy out than what goes in. Your entire physical universe is based on polarity. In fact, you are part of the larger etheric universe of nonpolarity, and within that nonpolarized field are the variants known as positive and negative. It could be argued that the movement into polarity is what actually created the physical universe. Your scientists already know that there exists a nonpolarized field. They call it the Bose-Einstein condensate after two of your scientists that demonstrated it in a laboratory. They reduced the temperature of a near vacuum until it was close to absolute zero and observed that the movement of electrons and positrons ceased sufficiently to collapse the M field potential between the poles of the M system. While this system approached zero point, it was not practical because it took a lot of energy to lower the temperature and measure the results. However, it did lead scientists to realize that the static state of the universe has superconductivity, or nearly zero resistance, and they know that the potential energy of a field of zero resistance is infinite. Thus, here is physical, scientific proof that there exists a field of infinite energy surrounding the physical universe. Instead of spending trillions on ways of acquiring more fossil fuels, and wars over scarce resources, your scientists could be using that money to develop ways of harnessing this unlimited energy. In the next section, we will look at some of the applications of zero-point technology. Power for homes and business. This is the most obvious application for zero-point technology. Already, there are watered-down devices being installed in homes in Australia and New Zealand, two countries where the dark Illuminati do not have quite as much influence. Even so, the current machines are only slightly over unity because the consciousness in these countries has not yet evolved to the point where nearly free, unlimited energy can be distributed widely. As these devices are perfected and spread to other countries, the costs of heating, cooling, running appliances, manufacturing goods, and operating machinery will be greatly reduced. Any DC or AC motor currently being run on electricity generated by fossil fuels and/or nuclear power can be modified to run on zero-point energy. The devices currently in production last about 50 years and, after the initial purchase, cost a few dollars a year. The initial cost of the devices runs anywhere from about $1,000 to $50,000, depending on the size and application. See the channel for more information on these devices. There are approximately 10 different zero-point devices, manufactured by various individuals or groups around the world, that will be entering production shortly. It is estimated that by the year 2025, almost 10% of the energy generated worldwide will be through these devices. We in this channel are planning to publish a book on zero-point energy at some point in the future. In the meantime, we encourage you to surf the internet on this topic, keeping discernment in the forefront of your mind since not all inventors have high integrity and truthfulness. New agricultural systems. Now that we have introduced new energy systems, let us discuss the state of future agriculture, because this is another area in which new developments are occurring on Earth very quickly. In addition to hydroponics, grow domes, greenhouses, permaculture practices, and other existing methods of extending growing seasons and cultivating varieties of fruits and vegetables that normally would not grow in your climatic zone, there are some new technologies emerging that promise to give you even more choices. There are service companies and individuals now offering to remineralize your soil so that your plants are getting all the nutrients necessary to produce healthy fruits and vegetables bursting with vitamins and minerals of their own. There are ways of layering your plants to maximize use of space. There are hybrid species that take a fraction of the usual time to grow and produce a crop. There are new varieties of existing species that can survive in more extreme climates. Some of these hybrid and hybridized crops are engineered in harmonious ways, while others use experimental methods and genetically modified organisms. The effects of consuming some of these crops have not been studied extensively. Although your inner guidance should be consulted before growing or consuming any experimental crop, it might be appropriate in some cases to use trial and error. After eating some newfangled tomatoes, how do you feel? What is your energy level? Was the yield worth the extra expense? Do you think you can reproduce this new crop consistently year after year, or was this a fluke? One of the prevalent new agricultural experiments involves different types of algae. Under the right conditions, algae can grow very quickly and produce enormous yields. It is suggested that proper growth of algae can feed all humans currently residing on Earth many times over from just a few thousand acres. To some of you, this probably sounds like something out of a fairy tale, such as Jack and the Beanstalk, but such advances are not science fiction. Genetic engineering has its positive side. With love and cooperation between plants and humans, the nearly infinite abundance of energy in the etheric realms can be brought into the growing and harvesting process. Despite the depletion of nearly 90% of the topsoil in the world, there is enough of everything necessary to produce healthy crops in almost every climatic zone. As you know, coming up with enough soil, the right nutrients and adequate food production are not the main issues. Distribution problems due to unstable economic and political systems, along with the way the existing infrastructure is set up, keeps highly nutritious food from reaching a lot of those who are malnourished. There is a great deal of misperception regarding how to feed the world's population. For example, over 3/4 of the body and blood types on the planet require an emphasis on fresh vegetables as opposed to grains, yet those in ignorance believe the answer is to grow and ship to the disadvantaged wheat, corn and soybeans, most probably genetically modified and laced with numerous pesticides. It is true that the Asian blood types often do well with rice, for example, but not every Asian has the right body chemistry to assimilate rice, and a great deal of the rest of the world does not have the proper constitution to eat large amounts of rice. The leaders of many of the agribusiness companies, in their deluded state, actually believe they are helping the planet by producing vast amounts of foods that the human body can barely recognize and assimilate. In addition, the monoculture practices in many countries may create an abundance of some nutrients, while at the same time creating a massive deficiency of others. This is in addition to the obvious disadvantage of monoculture in that if the crop is wiped out due to flood or drought, there are hardly any alternatives. The solution to this problem, in addition to utilization of the enlightened agricultural methods outlined in this section, is for food distributors to focus on broad-spectrum crops, including variety and seasonal rotation, and to realize that every human soul has unique body chemistry. Extensive nutritional research into ethnic groups, genetics, and adaptation in various parts of the world is necessary in order to understand which foods are appropriate in which locations. One of the major keys to not only surviving, but thriving, in the years to come on Earth is knowing how to make gardening fun, and to enjoy eating less. If you chew slowly, but with more awareness, more of your food gets assimilated. Savoring a fresh carrot and staying in the moment with the experience may be far more satisfying than hurriedly downing a processed snack on your way to a meeting. Chewing slowly and meditatively also helps the digestion and assimilation process. You require less food before you feel full if the food is vital and fresh and you eat slowly. We apologize for reiterating some basic topics here with which you are already familiar, but it is important to get a broad overview of the issues you are likely to be facing in the years to come. We suggest rereading the section on diet, nutrition and addictions given earlier. Enlightened architecture. As near as we can tell, the main reason for square buildings is to minimize cost and time required for construction. The mathematical principles of erecting a square building are pretty straightforward and most of the raw materials can be mass-produced. Yet very few designers have pondered the effects of a square building on the energy body of humans. It is true that square or rectangular buildings can assist in grounding souls into their physical bodies, which really means that such buildings help souls function in linear time. However, human beings are both linear and nonlinear, and the shape of the human body, along with the auric field and developing Merkabah vehicle of light, are definitely not square. When designing a building, knowing how energy grids intersect and interact can be quite helpful. If you have the time and materials, you can experiment with different shapes and see how they affect your physical energy. We in the higher realms observe that each building shape has a different effect on the body, and that circular, octagonal, hexagonal and pyramidal shapes tend to augment spiritual awareness more than squares or rectangles. Of course, there are many other factors to consider, including the terrain, amount of light, direction of hillsides, etc. We are not going to go deeply into the subtle science of feng shui in this discourse, but we recommend you look into this on your own. Our main point is to urge you to pay attention to your energy body as you enter and exit various structures. There is a reason you feel right at home with some people and not others, and it is not always due to the psychological state of the people you interact with. If you feel you cannot afford to build from scratch and have only enough funds to modify your existing structure, find out which rooms have the lightest and clearest energy. Next, observe the geometries, building materials, angles, heights, directions, and furniture of those rooms. As much as possible, modify the heavier or denser rooms to match the design of the lighter rooms. If you are living in an older home, or have been there for a while, the heavier rooms might be the ones where souls did a lot of worrying, or performed unpleasant tasks. Doing a psychic clearing on the old energy may be necessary before making modifications. Of course, in your enlightened design, you will want to bring aesthetics into the picture. If the first feeling, upon looking at your new dwelling, is joy and appreciation at the beauty and elegance of design, then those feelings will be magnified over time as you live there while maintaining that appreciation. We recommend you consult with designers who are both functional and aesthetic in their approach. Regarding buildings within an intentional community, it is important to consider how the structures reflect the overall philosophy of the community. If you are very close-knit and value intimacy, you will want to design your living quarters to be near the community gathering places. If privacy is more important, you will want to make sure you have living areas that are farther away from the community buildings. You may want to build your dwellings in a circle, with gardens inside, and then the community buildings in the center, like spokes of a wheel. There are some communities already designed this way. Such a structure is helpful to remind members that there is no hierarchy of rule among the leaders. A founder, council president, or wealthy member will live in the same basically designed house along the circle as a newly arrived member that has no prestige. Many enlightened leaders will, in fact, insist on living in a similar manner to the so-called ordinary members. It is important to consider proper placement and type of utilities. Some people are sensitive to electrical fields and you may want to minimize their use within sleeping areas. Ideally, your community should have some buildings with electricity and some without. A meditation room, for example, may have soft music piped into one corner, but otherwise be electrically free. Building materials. In some countries, it is legal to grow hemp. We recommend, if at all possible, eliminating lumber made from mature trees and replacing it with hemp-based boards and pillars. Hemp requires about 6 months to grow to maturity, while trees often require 30 to 40 years. We suggest combining clay, dirt, straw, and other plant-based materials for insulation and fillings. Naturally derived dyes and paints are highly preferable to synthetic compounds. This prevents buildup of formaldehyde and other chemicals in the walls of your dwelling. If you like the look and feel of wood furniture, acquire your raw materials from recently downed trees or odds and ends from other construction projects. Metal and crystals should be used carefully. Some people believe the more crystals, the merrier, but this is not necessarily the case. Crystals are amplifiers and you want to use them strategically in your design. Metals can also amplify both positive and negative energies and can be too harsh for some people. Do research on the effects of metallic objects on the human body, then experiment on your own body. Some souls love to sleep in copper pyramids, while others find it too energizing. We recommend domes and pyramids for different parts of your community, depending on the specific function of each building. Domes are more relaxing than pyramids, in general, so you might want to sleep in a dome and recharge your body in a pyramid. For a meeting hall or community gathering space, you might want to combine a relaxing and energizing infrastructure. Keep in mind that these are basic guidelines. Your budget, time constraints and available materials will impact how you design your community. If you have drawn up your purpose and goals and are clear about the intention of your community, your design will reflect this. Cities of the future. Later in this century, we do not predict that humanity will have highly concentrated industry and commerce centers the way you do now. First of all, as previously discussed, we anticipate a decline in your overall population. Second, the new Earth, and the souls that inhabit it, will value open space and peace a great deal. With proper construction, you can still fit a large number of people into a small space without it looking and feeling that way. You will have fewer automobiles, and those you do have will use non-polluting energy sources, so there will be less need for expensive, land-consuming highways. The inner part of most communities will be free of large vehicles. If supplies must be delivered, there will be a couple of small inlets where trucks can pull up, but aside from that, walkways and bikeways will be the norm. The largest buildings will be near the center of the cities, as they are now, but mostly for aesthetic purposes and to serve as meeting facilities, with living quarters along the periphery. Your old world cities were designed around manufacturing of raw materials and developed haphazardly out from there. The new cities will take into account the need to have gardens and open space around private dwellings. Because most resources will be acquired locally, there will be no commuter corridors with endless traffic. Any manufacturing that does occur and that requires lots of people and resources will be spaced fairly evenly throughout the city in order to prevent congestion. The spokes on a wheel design for a large city is useful because, properly implemented, you are never very far away from essential services. Instead of designing your city with profit in mind, you are thinking about the needs of your people. Fourth density souls will have similar values already in place, and so we anticipate that the process of coming together to design a city will be an exciting and rewarding experience. Again, we urge you to do some research on intentional communities that have visions of growth. How are they planning for additional members? Where will they live? How will they fit into the existing infrastructure? Our vision of your future cities entails images of great beauty and variety, without the ticky-tacky, block-style housing projects that blight many of your countries at present. A large percentage of employment will be done from home, or in small community centers placed strategically throughout the city. Factories, if needed, will also be aesthetically pleasing, as will essential services, such as libraries, medical centers, fire protection, etc. We see a green paradise of plants, trees, flowers, lakes, streams and wildlife interspersed throughout your populated areas. We look forward to assisting you with your many building projects in the years to come. New transportation devices. One of the most promising applications of new technology is in the use of propulsion systems. Clean automobiles, buses, trains, boats, airplanes and other vehicles will have zero-point devices and other alternative energy machines installed and the surrounding peripherals modified accordingly. You have undoubtedly seen science fiction shows where airships move along corridors suspended above cities. This is one of the technologies that will be introduced in the years to come on Earth. The air highways and ships will draw on etheric energy from the ley lines of Earth, without disturbing the natural balance, and will involve force fields of energy that eliminate all accidents. Imagine floating along on a ribbon of light high above the cities and arriving at your destination halfway around the world in only 20 minutes. As transport of goods and services becomes faster and cheaper, the cost of production will drop significantly. Visualize food being grown using new agricultural methods, then being shipped in zero-point vehicles to a distant storage location in less than an hour, then being distributed by airships to individual homes in that region. A vegetable growing in a greenhouse in Siberia could be on your table in Sydney 2 hours later, with almost no impact to the environment and virtually no cost to you. Of course, this is just to illustrate a point. In reality, the new agricultural methods discussed earlier will be based on growing food more locally, but for those goods and services that are only made in one part of the world, such transport systems would be a dream come true. One of the huge advantages of employing zero-point and other alternative energies for transport devices would be the opportunity to leave vast stretches of Earth in her pristine state. Production facilities could be concentrated in a few areas, without encroaching on sensitive wetlands, forests and deserts. These new technologies would also be used to purify and desalinate water. In essence, water would be recycled and then processed into a product almost comparable to natural spring water. After processing, the new technology transport system would ensure that nobody on your world ever goes thirsty again. You are probably asking by now about the use of zero-point and other new technologies to travel the stars. In many fourth, fifth and sixth density worlds, zero-point spacecraft are in everyday use. As you evolve into higher densities, transport devices become responsive to consciousness itself, and so such a device will respond to your thoughts directly. At even higher states of evolution, a transport device becomes unnecessary. All you do is think yourself to a distant star and it is so. You already do this in your dream state, and many of you pretended to do this when you were children. You will see the day come when all your soul powers are restored to you, including this ability. Time, space travel. This channel's guides, the Arcturians, have introduced several ideas relating to the nature of time, including past, present and future timeline healing. The ability to go forward and backward in time, and to traverse great distances in the blink of an eye, is possible due to the ever-expanding nature of timelines. As explained in an earlier dissertation, you do not violate free will or create paradoxes when time traveling. Rather, you open up new timelines and new possible and probable realities. Instead of one, fixed timeline, you have an infinite number of timelines extending and expanding outward from each aspect of the Creator. Think of yourselves as weavers of space-time fabric. Every time you have a desire and begin moving toward that desire, you spin a thread in the fabric of time and space. You have individual threads, your own personal experience of space and time, and collective threads, ones where many souls share common areas of space and time. For example, by collaborating with us on writing this book, the channel has opened a collective timeline. Every soul who reads this book has, as part of his or her timeline, the experiences triggered by the material herein. The rules of time travel are simple. You cannot interfere with another soul's free will. Visiting a soul in the past or future must be done with that soul's consent, though the conscious mind of the soul may not be aware of your visit or intentions. If your visit would upset the free will choices of third-party souls, then it must be modified so as not to affect those souls. For example, if this channel were to go back in time to visit one of his past selves in a former lifetime, he would most likely need to remain invisible to other souls, unless it is part of another soul's free will choice or soul lesson to have a visitation from the channel. The mechanics of time travel, and how to avoid violating free will, are complex and beyond the scope of what can be given at this time. Basically, time and space travel is a lot like telepathic contact in that you dial into the frequency of a time, space location and then create an energetic link to that location. This establishes a stargate, or portal, through which you can access the desired time and place. In our previous work, we detailed how to access higher or lower dimensions of the universe, using tetrahedronal grids, with ascending or descending spirals going through the capstones of each pyramid. Every spacecraft and time machine capable of traveling great distances would have a tetrahedron type of device, coupled with a zero-point generator. Such a device partially collapses the M field along the ley lines of a particular world or area of space-time. As the M field is altered, the spacecraft becomes relocated according to the area dialed in. In a rough way, this is a bit like folding a piece of paper to bring two dots together that are far apart when the paper is flat. In your sci-fi shows, you call this warp travel, or hyperdimensional transport. Understanding the basic building blocks of the universe, including 64-star tetrahedral grids, also called the flower of life, and spirals that ascend and descend through the capstones of the pyramids of a grid, is one of the areas of future science awaiting those 4th and 5th density souls that are planning to stay with the Earth during her transition from 3rd to 4th density. In this treatise, we are piquing your curiosity and triggering various insights with our words. We are not offering an exhaustive analysis of time and space, or giving you schematics of how to build a time machine. This would be counterproductive since most of you do not have the technical ability to understand such documentation. Those that do will be contacted telepathically by members of our group, and others doing similar work. It is our responsibility to determine how and when you are ready to undertake the work of building these devices, but it is your responsibility to receive the gifts of wisdom we download into your higher minds. Due to the delicate nature of this work and the likelihood that some of the dark persuasion would manage to acquire some of these devices, we still must be careful, for a while longer, to make sure this information reaches only those souls who are ready for it. Very soon, your planet will be sufficiently ascended so as to render these safeguards unnecessary, but that time has not yet arrived. We will glance over this book with a bit of amusement and quickly dismiss it as too far out, or too impractical, or downright false. That is of no concern to us. We are here for those of you that are truly ready to move out of darkness and into the new golden age you have been promised.